Hi, welcome to the first regular briefing sessions. These briefing sessions we started last year, and this is going to be one on banking and insurance. The whole point of this particular piece is to introduce yourselves and our audience to our regulators, get behind the scenes a bit, get some more thoughts about regulations, the practices, etc., and just flesh it out a bit. So, allow me to introduce my colleague, Fraser Brown, who's the Executive Director of Banking and Insurance, Authorization and Supervision. And we'll be having a good chat with him. So, Fraser?
Hi, Bhaskar. Good to be with you again. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.
Thank you very much. So, we obviously came through a rather interesting time last year. So, Fraser, why don't we hear from you as to what have been your thoughts on 2020?
Sure. Interesting was certainly one word for it. It would be disingenuous for me to say that business volumes weren't affected. Clearly, they were. But what struck me, was just how busy we were in the authorization function in banking and insurance. Inquiries really didn't stop at all. In fact, they seem to pick up, and in many ways, I think the pandemic acted as a catalyst in a lot of different areas, in payments, in lending, in digitalization of previous transactions, and we saw again, I think the coming together of innovative solutions with what used to be traditional kind of banking services in relation to payment accounts and transaction accounts, that blurring of the lines there, and that's continued apace, and that's continued as well into 2021. Death of cash, obviously, is something that has spurred that on as well, particularly in the payment space.
One of the things that we noticed last year and in the first 4-5 months of this year was quite a lot of ADGM banks have added more regulated activities to their portfolio, so to say. Yeah. Would you be able to shed a bit more light on what caused them to grow? What are they thinking about? What are they saying?
I think that's one of the really encouraging aspects of ADGM. I mean, I've worked in authorization, and it's great to see new entrants to the market, but it's also a really strong endorsement of ADGM when existing firms come back to us and say, this is a great platform that allows us to do more. Can we do more, please? Well, yes, of course you can. Happy to oblige. One of our banks has just upgraded from a arranger advisor to a full deposit taker. That's incredibly positive. And I think it's testament to the fact that ADGM offers ready access to Abu Dhabi PLC, if you like, the institutional markets. Abu Dhabi always, as the capital, was always the source of wealth, not necessarily wealth management, but that's starting to change. But again, testament to the environment that ADGM provides.
I would definitely agree with that. In my conversations with the banks, they are looking for enhanced activity and much deeper activity. Travel has been affected, and that is causing people to perhaps localize more, as Fraser mentioned, on the sheer amount of wealth that we have got in this particular region. And not just that on the private banking side, but also on the investment banking and corporate banking side, where you have got quite a lot of activity going on, whether you're talking about deals, whether you're talking about trade finance, so on and so forth. And talking about these areas, let's bring in the concept of digital banking. 2020, obviously, as you mentioned, Fraser, made banks especially realize that the journey towards digitization has to be enhanced and increased. And we've had quite a lot of webinars where we spoke about the drivers behind it. And I guess the proof of the pudding was the fact that we've had some serious inquiries and applications around the digital banking piece. Yep. So if you don't mind spending some time in talking about the applications that have come in or the conversations that we have been having with both prospective as well as actual applicants. What is their thinking? Where are they coming from? These are non-traditional applicants. Would love to hear more on that side, please.
Sure. We launched our digital banking regime, as you know, Bhaskar, in the middle of 2019. And that spurred a great deal of interest at the time. We're looking for quality over quantity. So we're not going to authorize every prospect that comes along. And we've talked to a few that probably don't have legs. However, we've authorized one digital bank so far that's very much focused on trade finance, and we have approved in principle another. The one we authorized was a startup. The one that we've approved in principle is an existing financial institution that sees the ADGM digital banking prospect as a really solid foundation from which it can launch internationally, so access an overseas customer base. It seems just recently in particular, we're seeing increasingly credible and sustainable propositions coming to us. We've literally just received a draft regulatory business plan for one existing financial institution that wants to expand into digital banking across a number of areas. SME lending, trade finance, those are two areas that are particularly we're seeing focus on. But also in terms of asset management and crypto assets as well. And we're starting to see digital banking and crypto assets being increasingly mentioned in the same conversation. And all of that's wrapped up in Sharia compliance as well. So that's potentially our first Islamic digital bank, which is a very interesting prospect. The other one that we're talking to in particular, I'd highlight, is an existing asset management firm that wants to establish a digital bank. So using its wealth management platform as a launching pad, if you like, to move into the digital banking space. So those are just two I would highlight, but there's been probably, as you know, basically you and I sit in the same conversations. There's probably what would you reckon, 8, 10 that we've spoken to this year that are
pretty
that I'd say are credible.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's the key thing that I would bring in over here. Obviously, Fraser is much more restrained in this. Me coming from a market development perspective have, let's just say, a bit more latitude to roam. And I think it's a package that we're talking about. The English common law, the proactive sense of having a digital bank, competitive nature of the fintech and ecosystem that we are building, and the fact that Fraser specifically is open to have a discussion. These are not cookie cutter piece. If you don't fit into this, then nothing else happens. But then I know we do have challenges. Some interesting propositions come in. We kick it around and say, okay, yeah, let's have a chat. So that's one of the reasons why we are having these interesting propositions coming in. In fact, we are having some good discussions with banks from India. What do you think, Fraser?
I think it's back to what I was saying about Abu Dhabi being a center of wealth. The Indian banks seemed in the past to focus on Dubai. I think they're now seeing Abu Dhabi and ADGM as a viable proposition to access the vast NRI market, both in the UAE itself, but wider afield in the region. And I think they're looking particularly at propositions around private banking, asset management, wealth management, and seeing that ADGM provides the ideal environment from which to access that, like I say.
I would definitely tend to agree. I mean, I did manage to visit India just before the second wave hit and had some very, very interesting conversations along the lines of what Fraser was mentioning. It's just the fact that here is the area where serious institutional financing, advisory, structuring of deals. India is growing, and it is growing at a clip which you don't see in other nations. It's wanting to export. Its companies are coming abroad. They are connecting into Africa, into Europe. That needs, both on the private wealth as well as on the institutional side, banking presence to do more. And Abu Dhabi has got extremely good relationships with India. Heck, I mean, I think we have Hindi as a third official language in certain parts of Abu Dhabi. There you go. Welcoming situation for us.
Well, the rupee used to be the currency.
Exactly.
Back in the 60s.
You are absolutely right. So I think it's just reverting to type. The economies are getting much closer. So I'm looking forward to working further with this and increasing the footprint over here. Just focusing on one piece, and if you don't mind, as the previous viewers would note, in these sessions we ask Fraser to home into one regulated activity and provide some more, let's just say, guidance on the application form, what looks like a good application, good applicant, etc., etc. And if we just focus on the providing credit license, we are seeing a bit of an interest on that. Fraser, what, in your view, is a good application and a good applicant?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Bhaskar. We're seeing, and it's going back to what I was saying earlier about the impetus being provided by the pandemic towards digitization. We're seeing that particularly in the digital lending space. So digital lending platforms being established. The idea being that through the use of API and data and algorithmic credit risk decisions, they can make quicker and cheaper decisions than traditional banks can. And I think that's probably right and definitely an area to be explored. But the traditional financial intermediation model is that of a bank that accepts deposits and lends those out. So if you take away one of those elements, the deposit taking, then obviously the question is, how are you funding your lending? And that's the key consideration that we have as a regulator, and that an application needs to be able to convey to us in terms of the rationale for establishing. So what is the lending proposition? To whom are you looking to lend? What's the volume of the customer base going to be? What are you going to charge your customers vis-a-vis what are you going to have to pay your investors? Is that spread reasonable? Is it sustainable? And that element of sustainability is incredibly important when you're looking at an application. I know sustainability is very much the mot du jour at the moment, but it has a particular context in relation to applications to establish a financial services firm. So, is the funding model viable? Have you really considered your costs? Are they reasonable? And if you have to go for further funding from investors, are you going to be able to access that pretty easily? Or is that going to be a difficult conversation to be had? And what are the trigger points for those discussions? So that first and foremost is what we're looking for, I think, in terms of an application. The rest just paperwork, mate.
True. One thing that just struck my mind, obviously you do spend quite a lot of time not just kicking the tires of the business model, but you really interview people who are coming in. At the end of the day, it's the person who makes the financial institution. And I know this is going to be a tough one. What makes a good person to operate in ADGM? I mean, what's your gut feel? What does that say?
Wish you could teach gut feel, but you can't. Honestly, it sounds like a sort of cop-out answer, but you know it when you see it.
Yes.
And I think it's someone that has experience of working in the market in a regulated jurisdiction, and that gets the importance of the obligations that we impose on firms. It's not just ticking boxes. We say it's a bit of a cliche. I was on a panel last week, and I used this phrase. It's toned from the top. So that's why we, as an authorization function, place incredible importance on the human element, because if the right tone isn't set from the top, and if the board and the senior management don't walk the walk as well as talk the talk, then it's not going to work out. It's not going to have a happy ending necessarily.
Yes.
So we want serious people, qualified people, experienced people, but who don't just see compliance as a cost, but see the importance of it.
Okay. No, fair enough. There we go. Good people. That's what we need, experienced people. Right. Couple of other things, if you will. One is we are starting to see an increase in inquiries around the captives and the reinsurance regime. Obviously, there is quite a lot of discussions happening. COVID has obviously impacted the insurance and reinsurance market. We talked about sustainability. Would love to hear a bit more from you on this market. What are you seeing? Any thoughts on what prospective applicants might want to consider?
Sure. And again, you're right. We even before the impact of COVID-19, we were seeing a hardening of the insurance markets. Premiums were starting to increase. That has only been accelerated by the pandemic. Costs across the sector have increased. The risk profile obviously has expanded. And so that's prompting large institutions to look at their insurance needs afresh, I think. And captive insurance offers a number of advantages. One, having your house insurer, if you like, brings you closer to the market. You get a better feel for it. And probably able to negotiate better prices because you're in the market rather than coming as a pure customer. And I think the other key aspect is that it gives you a chance to really think about how much risk you want to retain and how much you want to cede. And that provides you with a much more agile proposition in terms of risk management, because captive insurance isn't just about insuring risk, it's also about managing that risk as well. And I think increasingly institutions are seeing the value of that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I mean, as you can see, insurance is becoming more and more important over here. And in the second half of the year, hopefully COVID permitting, we'll do more outreach on this particular piece. There is quite a lot of conversations happening in the market, and we are going to be a bit more active on this. So watch this space. So now we're coming to the end, and traditionally, I ask this question to all the regulatory colleagues that we have got. Listen, I mean, it's in our interest to make sure that your application process moves smoothly and it happens at the best of times. I mean, it moves in very, very easily. You don't spend time on this. And that's the reason why Fraser and other colleagues have designed the application process in this way. It always is beneficial to keep on reiterating and asking them, what are the lessons that a prospective applicant or an advisory firm or a consultant should take on board to improve their application? So, Fraser, 3 things, and I know we've talked about it quite a lot, 3 things that you hope that applicants would keep in mind.
Sure, I'll try and limit it to 3, Bhaskar. Every application, every regulatory business plan for me has to answer what I call the 4 kind of questions: who, what, why, how. And increasingly, I'm seeing in recent times, that why question isn't getting sufficient focus. So the application, the business plan isn't conveying why the applicant thinks this is going to be a success, why they want to be here, why they want to access the particular markets they want to access, why this is sustainable. And without that component of the plan, the story's incomplete. There's a chapter missing. So think about that. I would encourage you if you're considering an application. It's an old bugbear, financial projections. I think I've said it every time I've spoken about applications, but there is a tendency always to overestimate revenue, both the timing of it and the amount of it. So the number of business plans and projections I've seen where revenue starts to flow in month one, it's very unlikely to happen, to be perfectly honest. You need time. You need time to build your brand, build your presence, build customer awareness. But equally, there's a tendency to underestimate costs as well. And so, on both sides, your financial projections aren't quite stacking up, unfortunately. So I'd encourage applicants to really think those through, take a realistic view of what it's going to cost to set up, and how are you going to fund the burn rate between those costs that start even before day one and revenue that ain't going to start on day one, and it might be month 6 before, or if you're lucky, before you start to see revenue flowing. Third thing, I'm seeing recently an increasing sort of rush to get to in-principle approval. That might be because applicants want to be able to show something tangible to potential investors, that they've made progress, they've reached a milestone, if you like. I get that, I understand that, and we can work with applications that maybe don't have all of the necessary policies and procedures attached, or don't have people attached yet because they need in-principle approval to incorporate, to have something tangible to show people. Get all of that. And we can work with that. But in the application itself, you've got to give us a bit more than just saying we'll put policies and procedures in place. We'll have compliance manuals. We'll do this. We'll do that. You've got to put a bit more flesh on those bones for us to be able to make a judgment. Anyone can kind of say that they'll have a manual in place, but we need to know, well, what do you think that manual needs to cover? What do you think your risk management policies, what are they going to cover? What do you think is important? Because that in principle approval, should we give it, that's a judgment call on us. And so we need sufficient evidence to make that judgment. So those are my 3.
No, that's a very, very fair point. I was just reminded whilst you were talking about the first one, whilst hope is a good thing to have, but hope's not a good strategy to have. You do need to have actual facts on the ground. So there you go, my friends. Thank you very much for watching this. We have time for some questions, which you can please ask online or send us an email, and we'll be very, very happy to have a chat with you. As always, if you need anything, please don't forget to reach out to us. Fraser, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Bhaskar. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And the next one will most probably happen after the summer. So have a wonderful summer, and thank you for listening.